Welcome back to Movie Recap.
Hi everybody, today I am going to explain the movie Escape from Mogadishu, released in the year 2021. In 1991, Mogadishu, the capital city of Somalia, is still ruled by the Bar government but threatened by a rebel movement. Meanwhile, both the North and South Korean embassies are lobbying to be admitted into the United Nations and looking towards the Somalian government for support. Kang Dae-jin, an intelligence officer recently assigned to the South Korean embassy, is tasked with passing gifts from the South Korean government to President Ba. He meets Ha Sin-seong, the ambassador in Somalia, who was running late to the meeting with the president and thus immediately takes the gifts. While en route to the presidential palace, rebels intercept the ambassador and rob the gifts. They further spray his car with bullets, forcing him and his secretary, Gong Soo-cheol, to run to the presidential palace. The two men miss the appointment by 15 minutes and are thus denied an audience with the president. As Sin-seong attempts to explain their delay, he catches a glimpse of the North Korean ambassador, Rim Yong-soo, walking out of the meeting room. In his view, Somalia's support for North Korea will prevent South Korea from joining the UN. Sin-seong initially believes Yong-soo to be the mastermind behind the robbery, but it is revealed that the North Korean embassy's intelligence officer, Tae Joon-ki, was the one who bribed the rebels to delay and rob Sin-seong. Knowing what happened, North Korean ambassador Yong-soo tells Joon-ki that this was a shameless act that was unhelpful and possibly detrimental to the North Korean efforts. The same night, Dae-jin reveals to Sin-seong that he had bribed a Western journalist with a packet of cigarettes for photos depicting rebels wielding North Korean-made firearms, thus implying that North Korea is supplying weapons to both the Somali government and the rebels. When Sin-seong questions this, Dae-jin dismisses his concerns, stating that if the photos are published, the Somali government will condemn North Korea even if the latter is not ultimately responsible for the weapons. Sin-seong meets with the Somali foreign minister at a hotel, and shows him the photos. To his surprise, the minister does not care and instead blatantly asks for bribes. Realizing that the Somalian government is corrupt, Sin-seong leaves the meeting contemplating whether to pay the bribe. He notices North Korean diplomats moving gifts into the minister's car. Enraged, Sin-seong confronts Yong-soo about the robbery earlier and the bribe. The latter counters that the South was no better for framing the North for supplying weapons to the rebels. Before the two come to blows, shots ring out outside the hotel. The war has reached Mogadishu. As the city erupts into chaos, Sin-seong, Dae-jin, Yong-soo, and Joon-ki are stuck in the hotel for hours on lockdown while government forces attempt to suppress the rioters. Meanwhile, at the South Korean embassy, Sin-seong's wife, Myung-hee, and the other diplomats, are startled by the ringing doorbell. Apparently the ambassador's Somali driver, Sauma, has stumbled into the embassy, badly wounded. Soo-cheol carries him inside the compound, however upon laying him on a bed he notices Sauma's scarf bearing the markings of the rebels of General Aided. While contemplating on what to do with Sauma in fear that he was actually a rebel, the police suddenly arrive and try to barge their way into the compound. Sin-seong and Dae-jin arrive just in time to ward them off. Meanwhile, Sauma had slipped out of the embassy, and while running on the streets, the police catch up to him and bludgeon him to death. The next day, riots have broken out at every area of Mogadishu. Aided has also sent messages to all embassies to either work with them to topple the corrupt government or be deemed an enemy and be prepared to be slaughtered for assisting the Ba regime. Sin-seong, fearing for his family's lives, tries sending Myung-hee back to South Korea, but is unable to do so as all banks and travel agencies have been shut, thus leaving everyone stranded in Mogadishu. Furthermore, the rebels have started pelting the embassies with rocks and Molotov cocktails, with the North Korean embassy suffering attacks non-stop. As the Somalian military finally retaliates with lethal force, both the North and South Korean diplomats soon realize that the situation has spiraled out of control, and with both power and communication networks all being broken, they must leave the country as quickly as possible. Sin Seong and Dae-jin head to the airport but are sent back as they are unable to communicate to the home government in Seoul, and lack official documents of clearance. Likewise, the North Koreans fail to make it to the airport, and are sent back to their embassy. Joon-ki, desperate to get everyone in the North Korean embassy out of the stricken country, sends for the rebel leader that he had previously employed to rob the South Koreans, for his assistance to get passes to get to the airport. However, the rebel leader betrays Joon-ki just as he set foot into the compound, and the rebels started beating the men, robbing the entire place, and sexually harassing the women. Joon-ki is beaten heavily but is spared as he once paid the rebels well for job. With food and medicine nearly gone, Yeong-su orders an evacuation and to head to the Chinese embassy for shelter. However, they find it abandoned and being looted by rebels. Shortly thereafter, they are discovered by a group of child soldiers, who point their rifles at them. The children in the North Korean posse pretend that they were shot and collapse on the ground, the adults follow suit. The child soldiers happily shoot in the air in victory, attracting the attention of more rebels. In the distraction, the North Koreans swiftly flee and stumble right outside the South Korean embassy. Seeing no other option, Yeong-su decides to ask the South Koreans for help, despite Joon-ki protesting that doing so would risk being labeled as traitors in Pyongyang. He yells for sanctuary outside the embassy, within earshot of the South Koreans. Since Seong still has reservations that the North Koreans might use this as a ploy to spy on them, and contemplates on letting them enter. Just then, a group of rebels close towards the embassy, firing their guns wildly in the air, but are driven away by the security detail that Dae-jin had obtained from the police. With the North Koreans now in the line of danger, Sin Seong relents and opens the gate to let them in. As dinner is served, the North Koreans dare not touch the food in fear that the South Koreans had laced it with poison. Frustrated with the distrust, Sin Seong swaps his rice bowl with Yeong-su's and eats from it, proving that the food wasn't poisoned. Relieved, both sides start eating and sharing food. Dae-jin, sensing an opportunity to use the dinner as a ploy for propaganda, covertly takes pictures and steals the North Koreans as diplomatic passports to make defection certificates, but Joon-ki catches him, and a fist fight breaks out between the two. Yeong-su and Sin Seong step in and tear them both apart, lamenting that political ideologies no longer matter, but sheer survival and working together to escape Mogadishu. With both the Americans and Chinese already having fled Mogadishu, both ambassadors agree to seek help from their other allies that are still in the city, with Sin Seong heading to the Italian embassy while Yeong-su heading to the Egyptian embassy. As planned, both parties head out in separate cars at the crack of dawn. They make their way across the war-torn city, narrowly escaping a group of rebels executing civilians. Joon-ki and Yeong-su reach the Egyptian embassy only to find it filled with refugees and no possible aid. Meanwhile at the Italian embassy, the Italian ambassador informs Sin Seong and Dae-jin that the South Koreans can join the Red Cross's evacuation flight to Mombasa, Kenya, but that the North Koreans cannot, as Italy and North Korea do not have diplomatic relations. Sin Seong lies that the North Koreans are defectors to the South and that they cannot prove this until their return. The Italians accept this and allow the entire party to enter the plane prepared for them, requiring all to arrive by 4 p.m. Upon the ambassador's return to the Chancery, the Koreans make preparations to leave, including taping the cars with books as makeshift armor, and making white flags out of their clothes. The convoy depart during Islamic prayer time, which allows them to pass through the city unscathed while the rebels are in prayer. As they make their way, they are stopped by a Somali army roadblock. While Dae-jin negotiates with the commander in an attempt to broker a passage for the entire convoy, one of Yeong-su's staff who was driving the last car accidentally sticks the wooden pole of his white flag out of the window. The already anxious guards mistake the pole for a gun and start firing at the Koreans, forcing them to retreat. Pursued by Somali army jeeps, the convoy runs into a group of looting rebels, who in turn chase after them as well. Eventually, the Koreans arrive right outside the Italian embassy. Realizing that they are right outside the embassy, the army commander orders his troops to cease firing, and suddenly, the street turned into a tense Mexican standoff. Joon-ho, whose car had separated from the convoy and was last to arrive, dies from the bullet wounds he had sustained. Italian troops open the gates and secure the Koreans, while both the Somali army and the rebels retreat from the area. He is buried inside the Italian embassy. The next day, the Koreans board the plane as promised by the Italians and are flown to Mombasa. As the plane lands, Seon realizes that both parties have separate delegations waiting to intercept their respective groups. Despite working together for survival in Somalia, Yeong-su and Seon conclude that they cannot be seen together, as neither nation will believe their experiences but instead send them to their respective military tribunals for court-martialing. As passengers exit the plane, the diplomats bid each other farewell, before promptly splitting into their original groups to join their respective delegations. With one last look at each other, the ambassadors get on their respective buses and head in opposite directions.
If you liked this video, subscribe for more content like this, and hit the like button to help us out. Also leave a comment if you want to recap your favorite movie. Until next time, take care.